My grandfather left me two things in his will: a battered old camera and a single faded photograph of a woman I had never seen before. The accompanying letter was his final request. Find her. Find the story behind this last photograph. I thought it was a simple, sentimental mission to honor his memory. I had no idea it would lead me to a decades-old secret, a hidden love, and a family I never knew existed. I was in the middle of a big life change. My grandfather, a man who had raised me since I was a child, had passed away a few months prior, and I was moving into a new apartment. The grief was still fresh, and every box I packed was a reminder of him. His life was an open book, or so I thought. He was a kind, quiet man who spent his life as a photographer, capturing the world with his camera. I thought I knew every one of his stories. The last box was the hardest. It contained his photography equipment. Tucked at the very bottom was his first camera, an old, heavy thing with a leather strap. And right next to it was a small, sealed envelope. Inside, I found the photograph and a letter. The photo was of a beautiful young woman with a serene smile standing in front of a rustic church. Her eyes were full of a kind of light I had only seen in my grandfather's eyes when he spoke of his past. The letter was short, but it held a lifetime of unspoken words. "My dearest granddaughter," the letter began, "I have always lived a life for my art, but there was a story I never told. The woman in this photograph is named Elena. We met when I was a young soldier during the war, and she was the light of my life. I had to leave, and I promised I would come back for her. I never did. Find her. Tell her I never forgot her and that my last photograph was of her." I felt my heart ache for him. He had carried this secret with him his entire life. The photograph was a clue. The church in the background had a distinct architecture. I cross-referenced historical records and managed to narrow it down to a small, remote village in the Italian countryside. But the trail went cold there. There was no record of an Elena living there. It was as if she had simply vanished. I almost gave up, but then I looked at the letter again. There was a faint, almost invisible postmark on the envelope. It wasn't from Italy, it was from a small town in Canada. This new clue changed everything. I searched Canadian historical records for a woman named Elena from that time period. I found a marriage certificate, an Elena who matched the age in the photograph and who had immigrated from Italy. Her married name was now Elena Rossi. She had married a man named Antonio. I felt a pang of sadness for my grandfather. His Elena had moved on. But there was another detail that caught my eye. Her maiden name on the certificate was Elena De Luca. I had to be sure. I cross-referenced her married name, Rossi, with my grandfather's last name. There was no connection. But then I looked up a passenger manifest from a ship that traveled from Italy to Canada in the 1950s. On the list was Elena De Luca and her husband, Antonio. The man who had signed the certificate was an official from the immigration office. I zoomed in on the signature. His last name was Jameson, the same last name as my grandfather's. It hit me like a ton of bricks. My grandfather's last name was not Jameson. His real last name was De Luca. He wasn't looking for his old love. He was looking for his lost sister. And he had asked me to find her after all this time. A sister he had left behind, and a secret he had kept hidden his entire life. What happened that day in Italy? And why did he never return for her? The story wasn't about a lost love. It was about a family ripped apart by war and a lifelong secret. My grandfather wasn't just a photographer, he was a soldier. And the woman in the photograph wasn't a lost love. She was his sister. The last photograph wasn't a farewell, it was a promise. I had to find out what happened on that day in Italy, why he left her behind, and what family secret was so painful he kept it hidden for over 70 years. I dove into the archives, searching for any information on my grandfather or rather, my great-uncle, Vittorio De Luca. I found his military records, his enlistment forms, his discharge papers. I discovered he was an American soldier of Italian descent, and he had been stationed in a small town in Italy during the war. This was the same town where my grandmother lived. I learned that he had a sister, Elena, who worked at the local church. The pieces of the puzzle were finally starting to fit together, but the full story was still missing. I found a personal diary from a soldier who had served with Vittorio. The entries painted a vivid, heartbreaking picture of the final days of the war. Vittorio had a secret, the diary read. He was meeting a woman at the church every day. She was his sister, Elena. The war was ending, and the town was about to be liberated. The only way for them to escape the approaching conflict was for one of them to get on a boat leaving the next morning. It was a choice they had to make together, a choice that would determine their fate. The diary described the gut-wrenching decision they had to make. They had to leave with the first boat that came, but there was only one spot left. My grandfather, Vittorio, was a soldier. He had a chance to get a new life in America, a place where he could get a fresh start. Elena was a woman, and the path for her was much more difficult. They decided that Vittorio would go and send for her as soon as he could. It was a promise they made, a promise that would haunt him for the rest of his life. But something went wrong. I found a record of a massive flood that hit the area the day after the boat left. The roads were impassable, the train tracks were destroyed. Elena was trapped. My grandfather, aboard the ship, had no way of knowing. He tried for years to find a way to get back, to send for her, but the world changed around him. He couldn't return, and she couldn't leave. Elena, my great-aunt, eventually found a new life. She married a local man, Antonio, and had a family of her own. She never knew her brother had survived the war. My grandfather, unable to find her, built a new life too. He married my grandmother, had my father, and became the man I knew. He had kept his secret all his life, a reminder of the promise he couldn't keep. The story of the lost brother and sister was heartbreaking, but I had one more piece of the puzzle to find. Was she still alive? I searched Canadian records for Elena Rossi and found her. She was now a grandmother herself, living in a small town in Canada, not far from where my grandfather lived for a time. She had his eyes, his smile. The woman in the photograph was still there, but now she had a lifetime of stories to tell. I had to find her. I had to tell her about her brother and show her his last photograph, the one he carried his entire life. But what would she say? Would she be angry? Would she be happy to know he never forgot her? I was about to find out. Drove for hours, my heart pounding in my chest. I had found her, my great-aunt, Elena. I was about to fulfill my grandfather's final request, to bring two separated siblings back together, after a lifetime of silence. I found her on a small porch, knitting a blanket. She was old, with lines on her face that told a story of a long, full life. I introduced myself, and she looked at me with a questioning glance. I told her I was there because of her brother, Vittorio. Her hands trembled, and she looked at me with a mix of shock and disbelief. I handed her the photograph of herself as a young woman. She took it, her hands shaking, and a tear rolled down her cheek. She didn't say anything. She just held the photo, close to her heart, a memory of a time she thought was lost forever. Then I handed her the letter from my grandfather, the one that explained everything. We sat for hours sharing stories. She told me about their last day together, about the promise they made, and about her life in Canada. She had always wondered what happened to her brother. She thought he had died in the war, and she had mourned him for over 70 years. She said she had always felt like a piece of her was missing. An unspoken story. As I was getting ready to leave, Elena handed me a small framed photograph of herself. On the back, in shaky handwriting, she had written, "To Vittorio, you were not forgotten." She said she had always wanted to give him a photo of herself, to let him know she was okay and that she had never forgotten him either. I came back to my apartment with a new sense of purpose. My grandfather's final request wasn't just about finding a woman in a photograph. It was about healing a wound that had been open for over 70 years. It was about honoring a promise and bringing two lost souls back together. I looked at the two photographs, one of my grandfather's last memory of her, and one of her last message to him. The story wasn't just about my family's past. It was about how a single photograph could change the future. My grandfather was a storyteller, and his story was the most beautiful one he ever told. He didn't just capture moments, he captured love, loss, and the unspoken secrets that connect us all. I realized that my own journey had just begun, and I couldn't wait to see what story I would uncover next. If you want to hear more stories about the human experience, about the secrets we keep and the promises we break, subscribe to The Unspoken Thread, and let me know in the comments below. What's a secret your family has kept?